because I was in a bad place. I think, you know, a lot happened when I was younger that I could never understand, I could never figure out, and I was doing stupid things that I blame myself for. But really going there and learning about it, it was never really in my control.
I'm a therapist who tends to talk about film and TV and things, so I don't know how much my audience is going to watch this. Many of you won't be interested in football, won't know who Dele Alli is, but this isn't really about football. It's about a man struggling with trauma and addiction, and I think it's worth us discussing that for a little bit. And to be clear, I know a lot of you love it when I do in-depth psychological analyses, but we are not doing that today. I tend to restrict those videos to fictional characters only, because I think it'd just be incredibly unethical to try and sit here analysing a real human being. In many ways I feel uncomfortable talking about this at all, because this is all his stuff, it's his life, you know? As much as he has chosen to open up to the media about it, that doesn't necessarily make it okay. But for those of you who would like some context for what the hell I'm talking about, Dele Alli is a supremely talented English footballer who exploded onto the scene when he was 18, made a move to Tottenham Hotspur where he excelled as Premier League's Young Player of the Season. He became arguably England's best player in the national team, and then suddenly something went wrong and he wasn't playing well and he wasn't getting games. He ended up moving away to Everton, which is a smaller club, but they then sent him out on loan to Besiktas in Turkey, and then that went disastrously for him, I think we could say. And for quite some time it's been one of those things a lot of football journalists and fans and people have wondered about, how such an incredibly skilled player falls so low when, even though he's only still 27. And we shouldn't simplify this, there are absolutely a lot of different factors behind that, but people mostly called him lazy. A clip from a documentary showed his manager at the time, Jose Mourinho, criticising him as lazy, and that largely became the narrative around him then. That Dele let it all go to his head. He got too big too quick. He got all the money and suddenly wasn't motivated anymore because he was already rich. He became lazy and indifferent, all those kind of things. To be honest, I never liked that kind of argument. The footballers that reach the kind of heights Dele reached have to be extremely passionate about football, not just about money. And the word lazy can be a bit dehumanising, I think, and make out like it's all this person's fault, that they just need to knuckle down and learn discipline, and that if they don't do that, it's their own fault. And it's just, a lot of the time people are demotivated. A lot of the time there are understandable reasons for that demotivation that they might need support with. Sometimes people aren't lazy, they're burned out or struggling with depression or under a lot of stress or whatever it might be. And I think this is going to be a general point to think on as we get into this video. Imagine if Dele Alli wasn't a footballer. Imagine if he was someone working whatever kind of ordinary job whose performance suddenly fell off a cliff. Consider how many employers would treat a person like that when we now come to understand what Dele was going through underneath. Because for someone so supremely skilled to fall as suddenly as he has doesn't exactly add up in the context, for which Gary Neville, who does a series of regular interviews with footballers, he decided to try and interview Dele Alli with the general premise of asking, things have gone downhill recently for you, are you okay?
You know, I'm concerned about him because when I see someone drop off like he has, from the ability that he has, then you always think what's going on in the lad's life. People want to ask that question, what's happened, Dele, are you okay?
Which, by the way, is a brilliant question to ask. So often when players underperform, people frame their questions like some critical inquiry, where the player is meant to feel remorse for not meeting the fans' expectations and things. Again, imagine if you worked an ordinary office job and this happened, but no, the question is he okay? And it's a 40-minute interview. I would highly recommend watching it if you have any interest in football or not, because it's an interview of Dele revealing he's been struggling firstly with an addiction to sleeping pills. Sleeping pills, it seems, are a normal thing within the sport, where like the night before a big game, sometimes they're offered them to help them sleep so that they aren't awake all night with anxiety or adrenaline and can instead be refreshed and feeling at their best to perform the next day.
It does work for the problems you want to deal with, and that is the problem. It works until it doesn't. So,
which is an interesting problem in itself to wonder about. Dele reckons a lot of footballers might have an addiction to sleeping pills, but for him, sleeping pills developed into his way to help numb his feelings.
The things I was doing to numb the feelings I had, I mean, I didn't realise I was doing it for that purpose.
He hints that it got to a point where he was taking them throughout the day to try and numb himself, partly as a reaction to childhood traumas that he then revealed. And to briefly summarise that now, his mother, who was heavily alcoholic and unable to give him any real structure or parental support, for which he states that he had no real rules growing up, he could do whatever he wanted, come and go as he pleased, as dangerous and scary as that might be for a child. He suffered SA from a friend of his mum's when he was 6 years old. He mentions at the age of 7 he was smoking, by 8 he was dealing drugs, then he was sent to Nigeria to be taught discipline, which we don't exactly know what that means, but he hints it was traumatic and most definitely isolated him from the family, friends and culture he knew. At 11 someone hung him from a bridge. At 12 he was then adopted into a family who he suggests saved his life, and it gave him 4 solid years of stability before his football career started to take off. And then there's naturally all of the chaos of the press, of the pressure, the intensity of the games and travelling and the money and adoration of fans, and all of that hurricane, which can be overwhelming for any young player, let alone someone in his position. And initially he appeared to manage, as is evidenced by his meteoric rise to the very top of the game. I would suspect, and I could be completely off here, that football offered a way to channel a lot of his aggression and to contribute to his game, especially for a player who was so incredibly physical and non-stop as him. I talked in my Ted Lasso episode 4 video fairly recently about how sport can be a means to channel aggression positively, but that doesn't also mean there can't be dangers, or that you won't hit a point where you start to burn out. Or this is where I could probably mention trauma drive, actually, which is essentially developing an incredible drive and motivation as a direct reaction to your trauma. And it's important to remember these are unconscious bodily responses that you might not really feel in control or be aware of, but it's partly protecting you, or I suppose helping you escape from those past experiences. So as a response to trauma, having this massive drive that would obviously help his game and his performances and his motivation to train, and as chaotic as football can be, consuming yourself with it as much as possible might help distance yourself from that past world and all those experiences. And in a way, that's obviously a good thing to have that motivation to help his career, but more long term and more broadly, it's not really healing, and in many cases it starts to get in the way because you're not feeling or not processing any of it. I suspect football may even be a bit of a buzz, same as the partying and the drinking that he mentions, and I suppose eventually, while slightly different, sleeping pills too. The point I'm trying to make, which to mention Ted Lasso again, is kind of similar to what I said of Jamie Tartt in my episode 11 video, how scary it is to have this thing that has helped propel your motivation and success, and somehow to have that drive start to burn out and become less effective, and how even if that is a good thing and it opens up space for you to be able to start seeking help again and to be processing or working on those difficulties underneath, how despite that it actually feels bad because you just want that drive back. It feels like your wings have been clipped. You could think about Zuko from the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, a man with this incredible drive, channeling all of his rage until suddenly that isn't working anymore. And losing that would probably be terrifying. How really difficult, but hopefully in the long term that's a sign of your healing. And yeah, it helps Zuko to eventually find a more positive, more powerful drive. Perhaps the same can be the case for Dele too. I don't know, I've gotten carried away giving an example that might not line up whatsoever with Dele's life. Do not start thinking this is him, because it might not be. That was more supposed to just be an example to say there could be a lot of factors for his sudden dip in performance. Why am I rambling on about that? Largely it's because, and this is the reason I wanted to make this video, because I don't like all of the discourse I've seen people having about Dele since this interview. The vast majority of it is positive, but I also wanted to try and provide a better voice for the sides that aren't. One thing is that I've seen people are frustrated he didn't confront his issues sooner in his career, face them at a time where he was still at his peak, and therefore he never would have had this dip. There's that side of fans who adore these players for the magical things they can do on a pitch, and there's that frustration when they don't meet your high expectations and your worship of them, especially if you forget that footballers are human. And I think we can all understand how that happens, but no one has any right whatsoever to be frustrated at Dele over this.
This is another thing I'm scared of about talking. Like, I don't want people to feel like I want people to feel sorry for me, because that's something I don't find easy to accept.
The man, I should explain, has recently returned from 6 weeks at a rehabilitation centre with trauma-informed psychotherapy from the sounds of it and various other treatments. Feeling in a much better place right now. That's obviously just the beginning of an ongoing journey, but it's something to be hugely proud of.
With some things, you know, they would really piece things together, because there was a lot of things that I would question myself about because it went against my values. And so I used to have like house parties and I didn't care who was in the house. And that was very much how my mum's house was. Without me knowing, it was my comfort zone. It was normal to me.
And yes, it is a shame for him he didn't reach this point sooner, and yeah, people are still perfectly allowed to criticise his performances in games, but not to criticise the fact that a man who has endured far more trauma than a lot of people can comprehend, that he hasn't sorted himself out sooner. Like, trauma is just this thing you do go and get sorted, like, here's your cure, job done. All of these years have been part of an ongoing journey to reach this position. He was a kid who didn't really know what was going on in his brain, it's rarely particularly conscious, and then his escape and his success in life was a thing that he could channel his pain into. Possibly. But you can't just expect someone to recognise that about themselves, all on their own as well, to then easily switch off that side of you that is blocking out and numbing the past experiences, and also keep all of your motivation exactly the same as it was before without any kind of crash or dip in there. Like, who could do that? People saying it's a shame he's taken so long, as though he's wasted and squandered half of his career, but he wasn't in control of that. It wasn't him squandering it, like he wasn't working hard enough at these things. I don't think we should ever be talking about someone's mental health journey like we're grading it, like they're doing badly if they don't sort everything out quickly and perfectly, and sort out, I don't even like that. It's wonderful Dele has reached the place that he has, you know, end of. There's absolutely no shame about it. And I think the reason that bothers me in particular is because I think of children I've provided therapy to before, where I've then had their teachers be like, well, the kid doesn't seem to be any better in my classes yet. Are they not trying hard enough in your sessions? Are they not working properly at it? You know, things take time, and that's okay.
We all think we're so unique that no one else has the same problems as us. But speak to a few people in that place and you'll realise that you have a lot more in common than you'd probably think.
I'm concerned partly about the pressure Dele might be under following this. We're having made these positive steps, that if he now doesn't suddenly become the world beater of a player he used to be again, people will start saying, well, clearly he hasn't put in enough work to sort out his brain. You know? No. That's kind of falling into the same trap of unempathetic criticism, when, again, it's not just something you sort, and if it proves a very long and difficult journey, that's not an indication of you failing at it or anything. So I am a little concerned at the sheer amount of pressure Dele may find himself feeling to hit his heights again. I mean, I hope he does hit them, obviously, that would be amazing, but the pressure could be really difficult at the moment. And there are aspects of the interview in that sense that I do feel a little bit like his agent might have told him to try and make it clear how much better you're doing, Dele, because then clubs might be eager to sign you, and that's sad, you know, if he has to justify himself in those sort of ways. I don't like it in a similar vein when people say he's only gone into rehabilitation and only opened up about this because his career is going downhill. Like, the whole thing here is part of a PR stunt to rebrand himself. I think it'd be cynical to see that as the main motivation for a man trying to turn his life around.
They would take me to rooms, cry and ask me to just speak to them, tell them what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, and I just couldn't do it.
As I said, there could be a lot of factors. I've suggested one possibility, but he talks about his recent injury and how that affected him. He talks about losing Pochettino as a manager. Probably many others we don't know, and most importantly aren't entitled to know. Why does that matter, you know? But look, I've gotten too caught up on all of those arguments. What I want to say are these things. Dele Alli's interview is wonderfully brave. I really mean that, you know, people always chuck out phrases like powerful and brave and inspirational, but It is. You can even feel his nerves in the interview, alluding to this thing he wants to open up about, but being uncomfortable with how to say it, and it is a massive thing to say, let alone to broadcast online for the world to write articles about. And I think the typical thing that happens when there's a story like this is that people always respond, you never know what someone is going through, as the, moral lesson. And then they completely forget that, and then they move on until someone else opens up, and you again go, wow, I guess you never know what someone is going through. And you don't know, that's true, but we can still try to find out, we can wonder, and I mean that in a positive way, not in a nosy gossiping sense, but trying to be curious about another person's feelings that you don't understand, or you think you understand and have written off. Because sometimes the people who need the help are the ones who don't feel comfortable enough to tell you that, and that does make it really difficult, but also really important that we try. And equally again, if Dele was in any other career, they'd probably have called him a bad worker and fired him and written him a horrible referral without ever once understanding anything about him, and that's quite a tragic thought. Which I guess is where we come to my real point. People in any job are always judged on the quality of their performances. Of course they are. And when that performance isn't good enough, it's either because they're not good enough, or they're choosing not to put enough of a shift in. Forgetting that these people, like footballers, are all human beings, and the quality of their work is not separated from that fact. It is not separate from how motivated or not motivated a person is, from what they might be going through, from the environment they're working in, or the support they're offered. Sometimes I feel like football squads serve good examples for how companies should be run, in a loose sense at least. I don't necessarily mean structurally, but for how managers are likely to coach and try to find a myriad of ways to get the best out of each individual player on and off the pitch, and to provide a kind of positive environment that helps them be at their best.
It wasn't like a footballer and a manager relationship, it was deeper. He cared about me as a person before the football, which is why it was tough for me when he left, because then you come into new managers, and it was hard for me to let anyone in at that point and to be open, and I felt like everything was just so fake. Managers would speak to me, I just felt like the conversations weren't real. It was probably more me in my own head, in my own ego. I weren't open to let anyone in, and I didn't feel like any of them wanted to really know me.
Something clubs are generally improving at every year still. However, somewhere, whilst it might not be their fault, I do wonder if Dele was let down. He highlights in the interview that you have to want to seek help if you're going to make the most of it, but for all the sports psychologists at Tottenham in particular, for nobody to have noticed or tried to provide support does feel like a shame. And somewhere in that there's a bigger point I'm clutching at, either to do with Dele or the treatment of workers as a whole, or something along those lines. I would try and stop to think about it, but I literally listened to this interview while driving home from work. I've then got in, eaten something, and now I'm recording this now, and I want to get it out while it's still topical. So if you do know whatever it is I'm not quite getting at, please comment it below so we can all benefit from getting to read it, and more generally comment all the many other things that could be said that I've forgotten to say or gotten a bit wrong or simplified. Like the video if you liked it. Definitely watch the interview, whether or not you care about football. Maybe subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Luke Hoare, Treat Chukeba, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Billy Lee Myers Jr., Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell and Michael Hart. Thank you.